Hi everybody, I'm Bill Brennan, welcoming you to another edition of Honolulu on the Move, the show that brings you the latest news and information about the Honolulu Rail Transit Project. You know, cities that have rail transit as part of their public transportation systems not only enjoy less traffic congestion, but also environmental benefits. This is the month of April and it's Earth Month in the United States. So today we're going to talk about the environmental benefits of rail transit, generally speaking, and about the Honolulu rail system. So joining me today, to my immediate left, are Aki Marceau.
Hi, Bill.
How are you, Aki?
Good. How are you doing?
Aki is a transportation planner with Parsons Brinkerhoff, who works on our project. And seated next to Aki is Mark Garrity, who now serves as the Deputy Director of the city's Department of Transportation Services and formerly a member of our project team. It's good to see you again, Mark. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, rail transit, environment, you know, you hear a lot about like the move to electric vehicles. It seems to me that, you know, rail transit is almost like the ultimate electric vehicle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in many ways it is. If you look at how rail transit will impact the growth of our surrounding environment, I'm sure many of you have heard about transit-oriented development, or TOD.
Right.
Well, that's kind of like the spine of transit-oriented development. So we expect that in the next, by 2030, there's going to be an increase in 200,000 people on the island. And we need to figure out a way to develop this island in a sustainable manner. Now,
right.
I think the going mantra here is to keep the country, right?
Yes.
So in order to do that, we need to figure out how we're going to keep the urban areas urban, and then by default, the country. So we're going to be able to, with a rail system, have people living and working and going between their residential areas and their employment centers in a more sustainable fashion by not using their cars but going by train instead.
Right. Is there a difference between using rail and using cars? I mean, if as far as energy use goes, is it more practical and energy efficient to travel by rail transit than by automobile?
Sure, of course. You know, cities around the world that have more robust transportation systems that include rail transit, bus transit, other forms of transit, and also have a lot of walking, bicycling, have much lower per capita uses of energy as a general rule.
Right.
And so in the United States, the best example would be New York, but certainly cities that have built transit systems more recently, such as Washington, D.C. and San Francisco, also show much lower per capita energy use than cities like Houston, which have traditionally invested less in rail, although they're trying to catch up. It's interesting how even cities like Salt Lake City and Phoenix and Houston are spending money on rail transit now.
Because they realize that not only does it help move people from point A to point B, but there are these environmental benefits that come with that use.
Sure, absolutely.
In addition to the energy, you know, there's concern about the atmosphere and
right.
global warming and carbon emissions and carbon footprint and those kinds of things you hear. What role does transit play in helping to reduce carbon emissions?
Right. Well, if you look on a nationwide scale, transportation consumes about 28% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And within that kind of transportation subgroup is airplanes, freight trucks, as well as cars and SUVs and trucks. So within that 28%, 64% of the greenhouse gas emissions comes from automobiles themselves, and automobiles tend to use tend to emit a lot of CO2. And so by allowing people an opportunity to drive less by having something like a transit facility or even buses, you're reducing the amount of CO2 that's emitted into the atmosphere.
Right. So, and not only is that better for the atmosphere, but you're exposing people to less of that kind of emission
right.
and pollution in the air.
Right, and I mean, now one of the metrics in order to identify how how much less people are driving is something called vehicles miles traveled, so VMTs.
Right.
And so if people are driving less, that means they're actually emitting fewer greenhouse gas. So our project is actually going to be decreasing the amount of VMTs island-wide. There have been studies that say that for every, I believe it's every 10 miles of a rail system that's developed, it's a 40 miles in VMTs decrease per year per person.
Wow.
So on an individual basis, it might not sound that extreme, but if you
Right.
take an entire population, that's a pretty huge reduction.
Yes. Mark, you've not only worked here in Honolulu, but other cities. Why don't you tell us what it is you've seen in those cities that have rail that makes it a beneficial for the residents of that city when it comes to either the economy and the environment and those kinds of things.
Well, rail is never built in isolation. It's built as part of a network and as part of a robust transportation network that includes all modes.
Right.
And of course, in all cities, a lot of people still get around by car, and will always do that.
Yes.
A lot of people get around by bus or by streetcar or other forms of transportation. In Portland, where I was living for a while, we even built an aerial tram to connect two locations within the city.
Uh-huh.
So there's a lot of different solutions that play a part in forming a robust transportation network. But in my mind, the two biggest things that we often don't talk about is bicycling and walking.
Uh-huh.
And those which emit zero pollution whatsoever
Yes.
are really the best ways. And when you have a good solid rail-based transportation system that has great bus connections, a good rail system that runs frequently, on time, people can count on it, then people can feel comfortable leaving their cars at home. And then they end up walking much more, they end up bicycling if that works for them. The whole thing just becomes much more successful. So it's not the individual pieces, it's creating an overall network that is successful for a city.
That's an excellent
And
point.
it's that rail part is going to be a crucial part of Honolulu and making it a much more robust system. Up till now, we've really focused on just creating a system that works for automobile users and have not paid enough attention to those other things that I've been talking about. And now we're trying to play catch up by building a rail system. And within the Department of Transportation
Right.
Services, we're certainly going to be spending a lot of time and effort trying to improve the capacity for bicycles and for pedestrians. Thanks to Complete Streets legislation that
Yes.
passed last year, we're going to be focusing on improving that part of the network. And what that means is making streets accessible for all users, making sure that we've got bicycle facilities where they can work, making sure that pedestrians are safe and that they can access the things they need to. The most efficient system is where people who can walk are able to do so and do. If you're, for example, living in a residential complex and there's a shopping center just across the street, but you can't get there because there's no crosswalk, then you're going to end up having to drive that short distance. And just that short trip creates all kinds of air pollution, congestion, wear and tear on the roads. All these things that we've been talking about that are in the news, the potholes, the need for repaving, all of that stuff can be reduced if we create a transportation system that actually works for people who can walk, bicycle, use transit in a much easier manner.
Right.
So those short trips, that's really what I'd like to focus on, is those short trips, making sure that people are able to not have to get into their cars. And when we have a reliable rail system that runs on time, runs frequently, and get people where they need to go, then that makes it easier for people to give up that car or to leave that car in the garage, which is really what we want them to do.
And I kind of want to piggyback onto that.
Sure.
I think the city of Honolulu as a whole is really moving towards that direction. HART and DTS and DPP are all working together to ensure that there are clear pedestrian and bicycle connections to all of the stations
Right.
along the system, and we're going to have bike racks available for cyclists to use. You can take the bikes on the train as well. So we're trying to make sure that not only the bike, pedestrian, but also the bus interfaces work well as well.
Right. Mark, you mentioned the entire robust system, but do you find in those cities that have rail that now people have a choice that we don't have here presently, and that's to leave your car at home? Right now you don't have much of a choice. You either have to take your car or a bus or bike, and that's about it. But the presence of a transit system is an invitation for some people anyway to leave that car at home and take public transportation where maybe they haven't in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been studies that have shown that there is a segment of population that will take rail transit but won't take the bus.
Right.
And I think the reason for that is because rail transit typically provides better service and more reliable service than a bus. If the bus can be completely separated from traffic on its own guideway, then it can provide the same level of service as rail. But the thing about a rail transit is you can see it, you know where it's going, it's very easy to locate on a map. There's no question that the train's suddenly going to turn left at the next intersection and go up the hill,
Right.
Which sometimes, if you're not familiar with the bus system,
Yes.
it might end up doing that.
Yes.
So, nothing against the bus. I ride the bus. I'm a regular bus rider. I love it, and I'm happy to see that the mayor has been improving
Yes.
service. We're adding more service, and we will throughout the year, and so that's very welcome. And as Aki mentioned, the bus is going to work hand in hand with the rail system, and those two go together. You really can't have one without the other. In this case,
Yes.
it's going to be a great team. But you're right. The ridership, the overall transit ridership, is expected to grow significantly once rail opens fully and serves all 21 stations.
Yes.
And it's going to be very helpful to have that. And I think you're right that it's going to give some people the idea that, you know what, we currently have 2 cars. But you know what? I can use the train every day. I know it runs 20 hours a day. I'm not worried about getting stuck at work. Why are we paying $3,000 a year for this extra car? Why don't we just get rid of it and sell it and we'll save that money?
Yes.
So I think for a lot of households, they will find that they can save money on transportation expenses by not having a second automobile in many cases.
Right.
And that's again, it goes back to what I said before. That ends up, when a person makes that choice, it ends up benefiting everyone because it reduces overall congestion, it reduces wear and tear on the roads, it reduces our impacts on the environment, on the air and the water. Everybody, it's just a win-win. If
Right.
we can convince a few people to leave their cars at home or get rid of them, and then that doesn't even mention all the people who arrive on the island without automobiles, our visitors,
Right.
who may or may not choose to rent a car or to have a car while they're here, may be able to get away without one.
Right. Hakeem, Mark mentioned that he's a bus rider. You're a bus rider too,
I am
yes?
a bus rider, yes. I ride the
And
bus every day.
when you moved here, you decided to live where you're living because of that,
its
right?
proximity to the bus. So I'm
Yes.
actually between both the 1 and the 3 lines, and it makes my commute to work very easy. I just pop in my headphones and listen to music or a podcast or read a book, and I don't even have to think until I get to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. So.
And I see that as something that people will do
Right.
with rail.
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to the bus, or in addition to the bus, is probably the better way
Well,
to
and
say it.
especially people who are coming in from the west side, Kapolei, Pearl City, they're stuck in traffic for an hour or so every day coming into downtown if that's where they work, and now they can just relax, take a nap, spend time talking to their friends, or whatever they want to do when they come into work during their commute. So it's definitely going to improve the quality of life for people on this island.
You mentioned the hour or hour and a half long commute in from the west side, and I would imagine that contributes to some of the environmental detriment of automobile travel, because that automobile is in traffic for
Right.
an hour and a half as opposed to 15 minutes, and so it can do several times the environmental damage because it's traveling in congested traffic as opposed to kind
Right.
of free-flowing traffic.
Right.
Yes.
And so one of the metrics, I mean, I mentioned VMTs or vehicle miles traveled
Yes.
as one of the metrics, but there's also vehicle hours of delay, which is another metric that we use to look at, how much traffic is impacting the surrounding environment. I also kind of want to mention the associated development that occurs with vehicle use. So I think a lot of people don't really realize this, but I mean, you think of cars emitting carbon dioxide, but there's also the development associated with automobiles. So parking lots, parking structures. I mean, those are huge black asphalt deserts that are horrible for the environment, that are, we have them scattered throughout the island.
Right.
And if we reduce the number of cars or the number of cars that each family needs, then hopefully at some point, there'll be a tipping point where we can reduce the number of parking lots that we need on the island as well.
You had shared with me a graphic that shows locally here in Honolulu the energy savings that we would see with our rail transit up and operating by 2030. Can you go over that for us?
Right, so because we're going to reduce the transportation energy demand on the island, so people are going to have to, or they're going to be able to drive less on the island, we're going to be able to reduce that energy by 3%. Now, 3% doesn't really sound like a lot
No, it doesn't.
to anyone. But if you take it in the context of, say, it's carbon dioxide, that's actually equivalent to 6,500 like the electricity that 6,500 homes would use per year. So on that scale, it's quite a large
Yes.
amount. Or if you look at barrels of oil, it's 120,000 barrels of oil, or gallons of gasoline, 5.9 million gallons of gasoline. So that little bit, that 3% energy savings that we're going to have island-wide is going to have a huge impact on the ecosystem of the islands and, I mean, the planet, which is the ultimate goal.
Right. I know a few years ago there was a Brookings Institute study that showed Honolulu had one of the smallest carbon footprints of any city in the country. But it said that one way to make it smaller still was to add rail transit as part of our public transportation system, which we were in the very early stages of doing. So they were aware that this was something kind of on the books and whatnot. And I think, that's a good thing to see through.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons our carbon footprint is pretty small is because we don't need to heat our homes. I mean, that's something that a lot of other
Yes.
states and cities have to deal with, and a
Right.
huge, consumer of energy.
Right.
Well, and Oahu is a small, relatively small island, so
Yes.
there's
Right.
only so far that people can drive.
That's true.
So the number of miles that people can drive in any one year is relatively finite.
Yes.
But we are blessed here with all kinds of opportunities for natural energy sources, and it's ironic that we are one of the most dependent states on oil.
Right.
Considering how many options there should be for us to produce our own energy. And I would just give another plug for the city. We're just opening up our Halava maintenance yard
Yes.
with solar panels, which will generate roughly half the needs of the electricity required for that facility. And so
Yes.
that's just coming online now.
Yes.
And it's just great little projects like that. I know the rail project is going to have a big impact by itself, but it's really this combination of all these things that we need to do across the island in little choices we all make as individuals, but also as municipalities and projects to reduce our energy usage and to try alternatives.
I know, Aki, when we showed that graphic that you talked about, that was based on all of the electricity being made from the combustion of oil.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And as Mark rightly points out, we are at least starting to move toward cleaner energy and alternative energy sources and resources for us to power that thing. So those numbers
Right.
could grow still, the
Right.
ones you showed.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, also with our system, we're putting some special emphasis on the maintenance and storage facility, which is a few buildings, I think, out on a 40-acre site in West Oahu by Leeward Community College. Tell us what's in store for the MSF, as we call it in the shop.
well, the maintenance and storage facility, I think, is one of the more interesting parts of our project. As you mentioned, it is on a 40-acre site, but that 40-acre site used to actually be a brownfield site, which means that it was once heavily contaminated with hazardous material.
Right.
And it's since been remediated for the project. And so now, we're going to be able to have a functioning facility on the project.
Right.
Or
So
on,
that's
on
an
that
environmental
site.
gain
Exactly,
before.
even in itself.
Yes.
So, I mean, prior to having our facility on it, nothing could be built on that
Yes.
area. But we're also designing the structure to be what's called LEED Silver certified. So LEED, for those who aren't familiar with the term, is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's essentially an international building standard that identifies when structures are built in what's called using green building methods.
Yes.
So
That's LEED.
LEED.
Okay.
Yes. And so the MSF is going to be LEED Silver. I guess there's different levels. You can just have plain LEED certified, LEED Silver, LEED Gold, and LEED Platinum. So we're kind of shooting for the middle area. And we're going to have efficient irrigation techniques, reduced water usage, we're going to be using low VOC, so that's volatile organic compounds, so kind of paint and glues that are good for the environment inside the MSF. Other features are going to be, in the construction of it, we're going to be documenting and diverting waste from the landfill by using recycling techniques. A lot of the materials that are going to be used to build the MSF are actually either going to be locally sourced or using recycled materials. So it's this very kind of holistic effort to make a sustainable structure that's good for the environment using the best and the newest of green building practices.
Are there photovoltaics involved, like Mark was talking about the Halala Corporation?
That's a good question. We're working to get photovoltaics on the site, but instead of putting them in the early design stages, we're actually going to look at the entire project as a whole system to see where the most effective way of using photovoltaics can be. So it may be the case that photovoltaics will be on the MSF, but we actually may end up putting them on some of the park and ride facilities or other areas. And we're still in the early stages of figuring that out. But it is in the plan to incorporate them in the system somehow.
Right. How about the rail stations themselves? Do they have special environmentally friendly kind of features?
Yeah, well, the stations, what's kind of interesting about the stations is the MSF is going to be, meeting these LEED criteria, but the stations, we actually can't certify them as LEED because they're not considered buildings in the technical sense,
right.
Because they're kind of more open spaces that lead up to the concourse and the guideway and the platforms. And one of the criteria for having a LEED building is for the structure to actually be a building,
Yes, okay.
naturally. But what we are doing is taking the LEED criteria that's established. They have these specific metrics that they use to figure out how something can be developed in a sustainable way. And so we're taking those metrics and applying them to the construction of the stations and the guideway as well. So we are requiring that all of our contractors develop what's called sustainability action plans. And it's basically a plan that says that they're going to, track how much waste they're diverting and incorporate recycled materials and identify how much of that is in the structure. So we're pretty much going above and beyond the status quo by incorporating these LEED metrics into our stations as well as our guideway construction. So we'll have all of that data available on the website as well.
Excellent. Anything else final you want to add? Because this half hour has flown by, and I really appreciate both of you being here and sharing your knowledge and insight about how rail transit works in cities and how it benefits, not only the transportation system but also the environment.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk a little bit here. I think this is a great project, and I'm looking forward to seeing it progress and move forward and ride it pretty soon.
Yes, okay, good. You know, we try to make it very easy for you to stay in touch with our project and all the progress and up-to-date status reports. And here's some of the ways you can do just that. If you have a question you'd like us to answer on our next Honolulu on the Move show, go ahead and hit us up on Twitter or Facebook. Just two of the places where you can stay informed with up-to-date information on the Honolulu Rail Transit Project. And you can view our latest project videos on YouTube or Vimeo. If you'd like more information on the project or would like a presentation to your group or organization, give us a call at our project hotline at 566-2299. Or contact us via our website at honolulutransit.org. By the way, we've redesigned our project website. Visitors to honolulutransit.org will find it a more colorful, interactive, and user-friendly site. You'll be able to keep up with the latest news and information about the project, important meeting dates, times, and locations, and examine the official documents that are guiding the project's planning and construction. Take some time to visit the new and improved honolulutransit.org. And don't forget that you can also join us here every Sunday night at 4:30 p.m. on Olelo Channel 54. On behalf of all of us on the project team, mahalo for joining us today, and we'll see you again next time for another edition of Honolulu on the Move.